Pistons, Knicks, Udonis Haslem. So
Mm-hmm.
Udonis Haslem had this quote. I'm going to put it on the screen for you guys to see. Talking about the Detroit Pistons facing, if they are fortunate enough to keep that 6 seed and the Knicks keep that 3 seed, says, quote, Jalen Brunson coming in or not, that ankle is not going to be ready until the summertime. I'm looking at Detroit. This could be a first round exit for the New York Knicks. So, Sean, I have to ask you, I've gone back and forth with other guests that I've had on this show. Some people want the Bucks, which I don't know how you watch the 2018 series and want the Bucks. Some people want the Pacers. Obviously, I get it. You kind of want to rekindle that rivalry that you had in the past. But like, I look at this New York team, and like, I feel like the Pistons match up with the Knicks the best out of those Eastern Conference teams that I just named, because like they've beaten them twice at MSG. Cade goes Super Saiyan when he goes in the MSG. I don't know what it is. He just goes
Yep.
berserk. Bright lights. Maybe that's why. But like, what do you kind of make of Udonis Haslem's comments about the Pistons playing spoiler?
Yeah, I'm not particularly surprised that it's a Udonis Haslem who's taken a liking to the Pistons because Udonis. This like the Pistons are. If you're to like draw a picture of like what's the perfect brand of basketball for Udonis Haslem, it's the way the Pistons play, right? So definitely not surprised by that. But to your point, I think objectively speaking, the team that the Pistons match up the best with, and they would have the best chance of advancing against, it has to be the New York Knicks. I mean, obviously, when you look, if you look at the roster from top to bottom, who has the weakest roster, it's probably the Milwaukee Bucks. But the thing is, they have a guy at the top of that roster named Giannis Antetokounmpo, as well as Damian Lillard, who are two of the better postseason performers we've ever seen in the game. And Giannis is not going to want to go out in the first round for the second or third year in a row. So I personally, and to your point, that 2018-19 series, we've seen the Pistons not match up the greatest against Giannis before. And I think of that in-season tournament game earlier in the year where the Bucks just absolutely clobbered Detroit in that high stakes intensity type game. The Pacers are, that's a young, feisty team. If we're talking about what would be a really fun series, absolutely that would be awesome. Like the intensity, the energy, the fireworks would certainly be there. But I mean, that's a team that is really starting to hit their stride as the season's gone on. Tyrese Halliburton's looking phenomenal, and Detroit might, when you talk about like the offense that they would have to put up to beat in Indiana, that might be, that might not be tenable. The Knicks, though, are interesting because it's not just the Jalen Brunson injury. It's the fact that the Knicks are not a good defensive team when that's exactly what Tom Thibodeau relies and really leans on with the wings and the players that he's brought in. Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby haven't necessarily been the players that they went and traded for. And then Karl-Anthony Towns has been awesome as a 3-point shooter, as a floor spacer, but at the same light, that is not a good interior defensive team. And Mitchell Robinson just coming back, from his injuries. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be ready to face, if Detroit can really exploit that, which as we've talked about, that is the Pistons' area of strength, is getting into the interior, getting to the basket, and scoring at will. And unless Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby just overnight go back to being the elite wings they used to be as far as defensive players, I think the Pistons could really give the Knicks fits. Should they be favored to win that series? I wouldn't go that far, but I would say this, like, I would expect that series to at least go 6.
I honestly think that like if the Knicks go into the series thinking that the Pistons are gonna just be an easy first round matchup, that's where they could possibly get burned.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of people are looking at the Clevelands, the Bostons of possibly coming out of the East and making the NBA Finals, which I tend to agree with. But I think if the Knicks kind of overlook the Pistons, just kind of focusing on who they could possibly face in the second round, that's where the Pistons could play spoiler and upset them.
Mm-hmm.
There's no denying that stretch bigs have really burned this team. especially with Karl Anthony Towns, Miles Turner, Brook Lopez, all those teams that I just mentioned, they all have stretch bigs: Milwaukee, Indiana, New York. But I think where the Pistons have an advantage is Tom Thibodeau is going to burn these guys out,
Yep.
in my opinion. We've even seen, Mikal Bridges saying like, "Yo, you got to bench, use it," because these guys don't want to play, high 30s, 40s every night. And probably their best player off the bench is Deuce McBride. Like, if I'm being honest, I feel like the Pistons have an edge in the bench because they don't have a Ron Holland off the bench. They don't really have a sharpshooter like a Malik Beasley. Deuce McBride is an above average 3-point shooter, but they don't have a Malik Beasley off the bench. They don't have a Beef Stew off the bench. I just think when I look at the Pistons, I look at their roster, I look at the lack of a bench with New York. I honestly think the Pistons could really upset them. And I think the national media has been paying attention to what is happening in New York, and it kind of seems like they're falling apart at the worst possible time.
Well, and I think with Tibbs, to your point, I think it's beyond opinion at this point of him riding his players into the ground. This is what happens with Tom Thibodeau teams every single year. And Jalen Brunson, who I'm a big Jalen Brunson guy. I've always been a big believer in what he's been. I didn't even necessarily think it could be this, but he sprained his ankle pretty severely at the beginning of March. And as Udonis Haslem mentioned, by the time he would be back for a playoff series, it's not like we're going to be getting the 100% Jalen Brunson. He's still someone who can cause a lot of damage, but where Detroit would potentially have an advantage is if you throw in a Sar Thompson on a Jalen Brunson who doesn't necessarily have that burst or that speed or necessarily have that same ability to blow by guys. Once he loses that with his size, that's a lot harder for the Knicks to really overcome. And all season long, he's been the cog of their offense. As important as Cade is to Detroit, Jalen Brunson is to the Knicks. They have guys who can score at will. Karl Anthony Towns is awesome, but do you really want to rely on Karl Anthony Towns to be your number one option in playoff time? I mean, I'm sorry, we've seen that story before. So, I know, like you said, Detroit struggles with stretch bigs, but if that's the only player they really have to worry about offensively, that's a little bit more manageable. So again, it's really going to just come down to what Jalen Brunson they get come playoff time, because I think we're pretty much cemented in of this is going to be the matchup. Like, a lot would have to happen in order for this to not be the first round matchup.
Yeah, I know people are mentioning in the comment section right now that the Pacers are only 3 games back of the New York Knicks, which that is something to keep an eye on. I know the Pacers, when I look at their schedule, they kind of have a cupcake schedule the rest of the way. I think if you're looking at a team that could possibly fall that is above the Pistons right now, it's the Milwaukee Bucks. Milwaukee has a pretty tough schedule, much like the Detroit Pistons in April. And your last 2 games of the season are against Milwaukee. Now, this is assuming that New York holds onto that 3 spot. Now, if the Pacers jump them, 6-3 matchup, as a Piston fan, I'd be happy for them to have a first-round matchup against the Pacers. But my only concern with the Pacers, Sean, is Pascal Siakam, TJ McConnell, and Miles Turner. Those are 3 players that I think the Pistons have a very difficult time, guarding one-on-one. TJ McConnell, for whatever reason, he just goes berserk. It doesn't even have to be when he's in a Pacers uniform. I remember when he was in Philly, he just used to give the Pistons fits. Miles Turner, we know, stretch big. Duran doesn't do the best job of, closing out on the perimeter, but I think as of late, he's done a better job. And then you have a Pascal Siakam, which I just don't really think we have a big enough body to handle the type of player he is. And he just loves to, work down low in the post. And he could, hit an occasional 3. Like, I look at the Pacers, and I just think there's just so many mismatches that they could exploit and, like, make it a really short series with the Pistons.
Yeah, I think you talk about Miles Turner, who, like you said, not only an elite not only like elite 3-point shooter, a much better rim protector than what the Knicks have. Tyrese Halliburton was not great at the beginning of the season. He's been playing much better, especially since the All-Star break. And Pascal Siakam, to your point, you can't stop Pascal Siakam. You can slow him down. You can make it harder for him. Tobias Harris is probably one of the better players you can put against a Pascal Siakam in those situations, but he's still going to get 20. Like that's just the matter of fact. And like this, when you talk about like a team that can match up very comfortably with Detroit in this current stage, it's in Indiana. Like they're really good in the half court. They'll run gladly if given the opportunity to. They're not a great defensive team, but they're not slouches on that side of the court. And if you're getting in an offensive matchup with the Pacers, you're not going to win 4 out of 7 games if that's the way the series goes. So, like you said, it's going to be fascinating to see how that wraps up with how few games there are left. It would take a lot in order for the standings to really move significantly. It can still happen, and that's going to be what's fascinating to monitor. I still think the Knicks are good enough to not completely fall apart as the season goes along. So I think that's what will probably keep Indiana at the 4 spot. But again, it is going to be really interesting to see what all shakes up and where that all ends, because that's going to have a big impact on what the Pistons outlooks are for the postseason.
Yeah, I agree. I can't wait because this time of year last year, I was looking at just like prospects in the top 5. Like I honestly, man, like I haven't even really looked at Tankathon too much this year just to look at the strength of schedule. Like outside of that, I haven't spun it once. And I've just kind of been looking at ESPN, like playoff standings.
Yeah.
Like it feels weird, but I could get used to this personally.
Well, and I was just out of curiosity, like I had like like on Snapchat they have your memories and stuff. Like I had like a year ago yesterday, I was covering the Pistons Celtics game towards the end of March when I think Tatum sat out and I think Jaylen Brown just had a dominant night. But anyway, I was just curious of like what was the Pistons roster that night? Like who are the players that's like listen to the starting 5. You have Cade Cunningham, you have Jaden Ivey, you have Troy Brown Jr., Tosan Evbuomwan, and then James Wiseman. And then rounding out your bench, you had Sasser, you have Evan Fournier, Chimezie Metu, Jared Roden, Buddy Boeheim. That was your active roster. So to think of that's the team that we were fielding and where we were at then versus where we're at now, it is a world's difference.
I never thought that I'd have to hear Evan Fournier's name again, but
Yeah.
here we are.
Yep. I mean, honestly, after this, we're probably not going to have to hear it very much anymore. I think even France is getting deep enough to where they're not going to have to tolerate having him on the Olympic roster going forward. So I think the days of that name being mentioned in basketball worlds are getting very, very slim.
Oh man, I remember when he first got here, and like you could tell he didn't get a whole lot of playing time, and he's like, Monty Williams is the best coach I've ever played for. I was like, bro, you don't have to kiss his ass. You're gonna get playing time. Like, good lord.
Oh, he was not shy to anyone. Like his qualms of his time in New York. Like if you had a question about it, he was right there ready to give you an answer. He would give you the full breakdown of why he was not happy being a New York Knick.
Yeah, it's honestly it's kind of wild. Like if you watch him in Orlando and then the Knicks are like, that's a good idea. Like he never played defense, and Magic fans would tell you we liked him for his offense, but he doesn't play defense. Like that's kind of like a red mark on him. But like,
Yeah.
Honestly, man, wish him well. Whatever. Don't have to probably hear his name unless he just goes like on a Twitter rampage like he did last time, and that was entertaining. But
Yeah, but the unfortunate thing for Detroit was he was more productive than any other veteran they brought in the offseason beforehand. So, that just says a lot of why they were where they were last year.
yeah, I mean, trading for Joe Harris on one leg and then Monte Morris' whole situation was weird. Like, yeah, and he was shooting the ball like he was Kobe Bryant. Like, he did not pass the basketball like whatsoever. It was pretty bad. I did want.